I'd read a thing that was saying a lot of people get into meditation, as in broadly, out just in general, outside of Buddhism and stuff like that, to get magical powers. Like they want to get like some sort of supernatural power. And I can't say, I go to Imperial College. I'm not exactly the most believer in magical powers, but I think I did the same sort of thing. I still do the same sort of thing sometimes, of like using meditation, thinking I can use it to get away with stuff. It's like, oh, I've worked till 3 a.m. But if I meditate, that'll make I won't have to deal with any of the consequences of that. Or like I drunk too much and I'm going to be hungover. Maybe I can like use mindfulness to stop having a hangover or to not have the negative effects of a hangover. But no, definitely the advice that's ignoring a huge part of the Buddhist advice of like notice what's wholesome and unwholesome and stop doing the unwholesome things. It's like you can't meditate your way out of the consequences of stuff you've done. You do need to just change some of what you do if it's causing you pain.
Hi and welcome to Zenmind podcast. I'm Karuna Priya here, and together with my colleagues, we talk about the benefits of mindfulness, meditation, and compassion benefiting mental health. I ask my guest speakers to share their journey, challenges and opportunities, and give their 3 top tips on well-being and resilience. Enjoy. Mathew is a research assistant in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at Imperial College London, studying fires in the external walls, the facade of tall buildings. Mathew completed his PhD by viva in February 2021. In his free time, he enjoys writing and performing music and comedy. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Karuna. It's a pleasure to be here.
Can you share a little bit background about your encounter with meditation, mindfulness, and what was your first experience like?
Yeah, of course. So I actually got into mindfulness slightly before I met you, or started going to sort of the college chaplaincy and stuff like that. My first impact with it was a flatmate I lived with back in when I started my PhD. His name was Dan. We used to share a room together, and he was very intense. He was one of these. He was very focused on work and self-improvement. And he had got into mindfulness. Basically, he read all these books about like what successful CEOs do and stuff like that. And meditation was coming up. And he got a meditation app. And he was like, Matt, I'm meditating in the evening. We shared a room. And he's like, Matt, I'm meditating in the evenings. Do you want to join me? And I was like, yeah, okay. I'll do it. And at first, it was kind of like, it was quite relaxing before sleep, but it wasn't hugely effective. But at some point, it just sort of became sort of more and more relaxing. The first time, there was a point where one time it actually just stopped my thinking. And I think at that point, I have a big problem with overthinking everything and my thoughts going around all the time. And like the first time that happened, I was like, oh, this is really good. This is the first thing I've done that has ever made me just my brain shut up for a bit. And then I got into it a bit more, started coming to the chaplaincy and interfaith, and eventually met you and the Buddhist meditation.
Often we have this idea in our head, how it should be, and what we're going to do, what we're going to achieve. When you actually do it, it's nothing like it.
You want to become something. Like, well, as I say, I started, my friend got me into it because he wanted to be more successful. And it was like a path to sort of success along being starting a startup or something like that. But that's kind of, that's what meditation is trying to teach you, not to be worried about, to kind of let go of needing to become anything or change how the meditation's going or anything like that. It's kind of, I still struggle with this because I still want it to be positive and calm and relaxing. And when my meditation is not like that, I still find it very disappointing. But
Yes, it's not easy. I mean, it's human nature, isn't it? We want to get something. We want to feel good all the time. We don't want the unpleasant experiences. It's human nature. I think part of the learning is learning to accept the difficulty or challenges, and to be able to have loving kindness for ourselves. That it's okay, the mind is busy or wanting something. And I think it's a bit like, learning to ride the bike. And you learn eventually to let go, and you get really good at it. I think definitely meditation can help with concentration, focus, productivity.
Yeah.
I believe like what your friend was doing. And definitely, I think a lot of people do that. I mean, we as humans, we want to be more productive, we want to be more focused, but then we realize that also ultimately we want to let go of that as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess the thing is, it's like, why did you want all of this success or focus or stuff in the first place? And it's usually because you want a bit more happiness and freedom from suffering. And then you're like, and then you're quite far, if you're still going along I think that's why when I started, I was going to when I joined the college chaplaincy to begin with, and I started going to meditation sessions because I was like, I want to do a bit more. I didn't go to the Buddhist ones to begin with because I wasn't religious, and it seemed like I don't want to, I don't really need Buddhism. They had a secular mindfulness one, but then I left that exact reason. I swapped to the Buddhist ones, not because I felt I was suddenly Buddhist, but just because the secular mindfulness ones is kind of like, you're using mindfulness to train yourself so you can go do more of the same, whereas it feels like there's more of a spiritual, like when you get far enough along it, you're like, this feels like there should be something more spiritual and improving your life a bit. Like it should be beyond just getting better at doing the same stuff in your life.
What's your definition of spirituality?
Yeah, that's a big one. But I think it's about having something. I think there's a mixture of things there for me. Something about having something bigger than yourself, so it's not just you and your ego and about what you want. And also, like, I think if religions exist for a reason, it's to kind of like give a reason to change, to help you, or to change something about yourself from an external context. Like if you're just using religion as like an identity, or like a little, I think some people use it as like I'm this because I like saying I'm that, and it makes me feel good to be part of the thing. I'm not saying that's bad. That's completely reasonable. But I think the reason they're so successful over long periods of time is the sort of ones that let you sort of transcend yourself a bit and transcend sort of the natural focus on yourself.
Can someone be spiritual and not religious?
That's a big question, and I think it really depends on how people. I think people define spirituality and religion differently. Like for some people, religion and religiosity, or being religious, is tied up in organized religion, in which case 100% you could be spiritual and not be part of an organized religion. But for some people, the idea of religion, if you're defining it as vaguely as I just did there, like having something bigger than yourself and trying to transform yourself, I think then it's a lot more difficult to be spiritual, not religious. But maybe that's just how I've tied them up in my head. I know that's a bad answer, but it's basically saying language games, and
yes,
everyone defines things differently.
I think it's worth coming to the term in Sanskrit about spiritualities. They use the word called adhyatmika, and adhyatmika is what you were sharing about earlier, that you are beyond this person. You're not just like this physical body. Much more, to how we are part of the cosmos, or part of the universe, part of the nature.
I think that's really interesting, actually, because you said when you define spirituality in that way, it makes me think of like you have those kind of like, and I don't think these are uncommon. People have kind of spiritual experiences when it's like they feel suddenly outside of themselves, suddenly connected to someone else, other people. Maybe if you fall, like for some people, it's just you fall deeply in love with someone, and for the first time, it's kind of like, oh, they're as important as me, or like maybe you see a beautiful sunset and you just like completely lose yourself in nature, whatever it is.
That's a good analogy, yeah.
And it's like, oh, that's a kind of spiritual experience, but it's not, but you could just be completely not have any kind of religious beliefs. But in a way, I guess how I was defining religiosity earlier about a way to change yourself and get outside yourself is almost like the path towards more of those spiritual experiences, maybe. I think part of what led me down this path towards Buddhism, obviously I mentioned how mindfulness sort of just came up in my life, but like I think the path that led towards investigating Buddhism was kind of like I was investigating a lot of what is consciousness, what's going on with the mind, right? I've always been really interested in the human mind. And I think something you start getting into is you don't really realize it until you start investigating all these other theories, is by being brought up a scientist, I feel that's been what I've really been focused on. There's an inherent story you're told, which actually doesn't have any, it's not backed up by science. It's just a story that comes along with it, which is a general feeling that like, oh, everything's just a machine. It's just a process. You know, the Big Bang happened and is happening, and it's all just, there's no choice in there. It's all this predetermined path, and we're just part of the physical experience, and there's nothing special about awareness, and at the end of it, it will just disappear. Like that's kind of the logic, is like, oh, you somehow have consciousness now and it will disappear. And it's a weird one because that's just another story that someone's told about how things are. That none of the scientific theories weren't made to explain that, and they don't explain that. They talk about how stuff works and sort of like, oh, this thing works this way, we can predict this, so probably, you know, atoms are behaving this way and things like that. But it's not saying, it doesn't say anything about like, you know, I remember someone saying like, oh, we can explain consciousness in terms of an emergent behavior in the brain, but that's just more words attaching to like, what is an emergent behavior in the brain that still doesn't explain why we're aware of anything. And
there's a correlation though, right? There's a correlation, say in the brain, let's say when you get scared or something, certain part of the network is activated. Just like when you feel loved or compassion, that you can see the correlation. But what you're saying is that it's not just the brain, right?
Yeah, I guess here's the thing. Yeah, I guess the thing is there's a correlation. There are correlations between how you feel and how the brain behaves and how your body behaves. And clearly you are connected to what your body does. But I think, and this is, I think a big part of Buddhism is the whole point that like, you know, what you're made up of is not just like that, also came out of things external to you. And the way it responds is also kind of responds outside of you as well. And yeah, in a way, there's nothing separate from the processes that are happening in your brain to the processes that are happening outside of your brain or outside of your body. And then if you combine this with the fact that when you get into really, really deep meditation, you do kind of feel like there isn't any separation between you and anything else anymore. It makes about as much sense to say like, you know, consciousness exists independent or awareness exists independent of matter, to say matter exists independent of, or like it just arises spontaneously out of matter. They're almost the same thing because we don't know what it is or where it comes from. So I know that sounds really weird, but it's basically, they have that whole debate, and I'm not an expert in quantum mechanics. I did it for 2-3 years in my undergrad, but they have a whole debate over if the observer, you know, every system you look at is coupled between object and observer, but you can never take the observer out of the system because it disturbs the system. So a universe without observers, we don't even know what that would be or whether anything would happen. And there's not really a way to resolve it. So,
also, it reminds me of the Zen koan about the paradox about if a tree fell down deep in the forest and there was no one around, would the sound exist?
And I think one of the best things about it that's made me feel a lot better is kind of the story you tell about the Buddha and the guy being shot with the arrow. You know, it's like a guy who's been shot with an arrow, he's in pain, and they're like, oh, we're going to pull the arrow out and heal you. And he's like, no, you can't pull it out until you've told me who shot me, why he shot me, where he came from, you know, who made this arrow. And he wants to know all these details. And it's like, no, the most practical thing would be to, you know, remove the arrow and let yourself get better. And I think that's what there's a big part of Buddhism, which is like, you know, it encourages you to investigate how you're experiencing things and what's going on and the way you interact with the world, but it's not offering any concrete answers about like, oh, this is the way the universe is, this is where consciousness comes from, this is where the universe comes from. It's saying like those questions are not going to help you have a happier life or not. So
yeah. Matt, we kind of are both mutually interested in, let's say, machine learning or AI, and also I think the future is AI in some way. You know, what's your take on it? Like, can computer have consciousness? Can computer self-govern itself?
Yeah, and it's a really interesting one. I think at the moment the answer is no, in terms of like I think we're a long way from I don't know, things move really quickly and I'm not an expert in the field of AI, so who knows what I know for sure, but it seems at the moment we're a long way off from actually intelligent machines. You know, we talk about human level intelligence, but the machines, we can't make machines as smart as animals.
Yeah, I mean, we evolved for thousands of years, right? The human,
more than that, I think.
Yeah, millions, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So it took a long time, really, for the consciousness or even life to become so intelligent as it is right now.
Yeah, and it was using a completely different set of processes to what we're doing as well. And we don't really understand what they are either. Like, we don't know where we've come from. And I think it's interesting that a lot of the studies into AI also have also led to breakthroughs in neuroscience and vice versa. Like, they do feed into each other. So I don't think it's completely disconnected from real biological intelligence or anything like that. And I think the premise, I think this is where we're talking about like consciousness and stuff before. Is it something separate? Is it something not? I don't know for sure. But what I think is interesting in Buddhism, at least, you don't have the idea of like an eternal soul or anything like that. You know, things sort of change throughout time, and you know, there isn't this eternal you that is there's existing beyond the body or anything like that to be that will last forever or anything like that. It will also change. So I don't know why in that setting, and also like they're saying you're getting reincarnated to animals and all sentient creatures and all that. So I don't see why you couldn't do that artificially, or like why we're restricting life to like just things that are made of carbon,
yes,
like, or something like that. Like, I don't see why it couldn't arise somewhere else. I think the mechanism of how that would happen is, so I certainly don't understand it, and I don't think anyone on Earth is currently close to understanding that. But maybe they are. Maybe someone somewhere is about to have a massive breakthrough. Who knows? But
yeah, I think one of the Buddhist theories is the interdependent origination. That means if there are enough causes and conditions for it to be there, then it is possible to have life, I think that's an open kind of a theory that it is possible, given that there are enough circumstances, just like, a bacteria can grow from, moisture and things like, because there is the conditions.
But I think as well, and I think this, coming back to what I was saying before about the sort of consciousness, if there was consciousness independent of matter, I'm not saying I've come down either side of this debate, right? But like, if it wasn't just arising from matter, but like there was some sort of independent field or whatever of consciousness that you needed to disturb, again, like AI doesn't solve that debate one way or the other, because it could just be that you develop a system which also disturbs that field in the same way. Like that could be the solution to making awareness, living awareness or whatever. The thing is, it would, for us to even consider it in the realm of science, it would need to be measurable in the first place.
Yeah.
So otherwise, it could always just be forever a mystical debate about, is this AI really thinking or not? And maybe it will be. Maybe there is literally no way to ever measure someone else's awareness, and you just have to trust them on it.
Yeah, there are recent scientific breakthroughs in neuroscience. They're able to measure. There's a lot yet still, but still they're able to measure, like say meditator's brain, for example, how, what happens when you give certain conditions and they react differently. I think that's amazing to be able to measure it and to see in the lab what's happening. The other questions, Mathew, is that, do we need scientifically proven practice in order to engage or explore some of these spiritual practices? Do we need that, or science is yet to kind of catch up?
I think that's a great question, because it's something I've definitely pondered quite a bit. And I think what is important is one of the 8 precepts or whatever of the Buddhist path, I think is, I always forget which one it is, but it's like right attitude or right faith.
Right intention.
Yeah, right intention. Thank you. And I think, and it's because, faith comes up a lot in Christianity. I was brought up a Christian originally. And like that kind of faith is supposed to be, just believe in, give up trying to think about it and like believe and take that leap of faith, sort of blind faith, or at least that's how it was presented to me in church. I'm sure not everyone sees it that way, but in Buddhism, definitely when they're talking about faith, it's kind of, you have to think about it so much. It's like observe, contemplate so much that you understand it to be true. It's much more akin to scientific belief of like, you think about something so much and you like contemplate it where you're like, no, I've convinced myself that's got to be like, this makes sense. Like I've gone through, I've really analyzed it and now it makes sense. And so I'm confident, unless something else comes my way, that this is true. And that's kind of the aspect of faith. So I think in that way, when you're saying like, is scientific contemplation necessary? I think maybe for some people it is, because that is what is needed to give them the level of, for some people, I think they can just have an experience and they're like, I feel that's true. To me, that is true. And I can work on that and it's fine. And I think for other people, it's like, they're not going to have that right intention until they've really dived down the scientific path or like, solved all these things. So I think, yeah, it really depends what you need to have the confidence to go with it. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. That's great. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back,
Thank you.
When we come back, we're going to hear your 3 top tips for health and well-being.
back. Yeah, hello.
So, share with us, share with the audience, what's your top tips for health and well-being?
Okay, well, number one is a cliche, but exercise and eat healthily, because I kind of tricked myself into exercising and eating healthily in my undergrad when I suddenly decided I needed to look a certain way to have a better chance with women and stuff like that. But I'll tell you what, it was a great move outside of that, because I think that's had more of an impact on my general well-being than anything else I've done. I think a lot of changes to your mental well-being can just come from physical
Also
changes.
confidence, isn't it? Confidence, self-esteem.
And I think, just exercise regularly, eat relatively healthily. I think you can also cause yourself mental stress if you get too upset about that. Like some people go like, oh, I didn't exercise today, I hate myself, or oh, I'm so guilty about eating this pizza. Obviously that's not good, but just putting some effort into that, I think, gives a lot of dividends. So that's number one. Number two would be, and this, I'm not saying why these is more important than the other one, because I think these are all really important. Number two is being connected to people, and sort of, making connections to people. And I think in that case is kind of the key part is just having a bit of emotional vulnerability. I think if you cut yourself off and try and like hide who you are from people, that caused me a lot of suffering and pain. And I think the more I've opened up to people, the more happy I've been. And every now and again it's caused pain, like you've opened up and someone's abused that trust, but overall much more positive than negative.
There can be element of fear, I think, among people to be able to open up to, especially if your trust has been taken advantage in the past and you were heartbroken, and then can I trust another human being again, right? There's that element. And I think as much as it protects you, but also it blocks you or prevents you from further development or other emotions like love, connections, and having a good social life as well.
For some people that is going to be really, really difficult, and I can't I can't imagine the challenge for some people who've been hurt a lot before. That's going to be really, really hard.
And maybe we need some help in the beginning, probably, with that. Maybe talk to a therapist, or maybe have a support group, or in a meditation group. Just build that up. It's not like one thing. Like it's not like in one goal. It will take time to build that up, and heal from those past wounds, I guess.
Although I think that's also why it's important if you're not if you can open up to people and you can get past that, and that's also helps other people to feel more comfortable opening up themselves. That's a big part of it. It's like, if you connect to people, they'll often connect back. Shared vulnerability brings a lot of meaning to life, for me at least. And then I guess the third tip, we've already pretty much said it, and I think it sort of comes into other, but it's just letting go of stuff. If meditation has taught me anything, or just generally the practice over the last few years is like, the more you let go and the faster you let go, often the better off things end up being.
What's your definition of letting go? How to let go? Like, what's letting go means?
That's a great great question, because I don't think it has a I think it's a really kind of like felt thing. Like you can't really put it into words a lot of the time. It's kind of like you just, I guess what I think the most useful advice, the best way of describing it I've read was someone was saying, I think it was, maybe this was even you, I don't know, sort of like, if you hold something for a long time, and just keep holding it, and then let go of it. And what does that feel like? Try and do that, but mentally as well. And yeah, it takes, I guess that's why meditation is such a weird practice to begin with, is because you sit down and you don't really know what it is you're doing. It's kind of like you've just got to notice when you do it by accident. You sort of let go a bit. You accidentally let go while you're trying to focus on something or else, and then
you learn to drop it, right?
Yeah. And then if you remember what that felt like, the moment where your brain, you forgot, or like you were so focused on your breath that you forgot about your boss shouting at you or whatever it was you were holding on to. If you remember what that felt like, then you can kind of do it more easily.
Thank you, Matthew, for sharing your top tips. And we
No worries.
Look forward to hearing again from you.
Thank you
very much.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks for inviting me.
If you like listening to our podcast and our interviews with leading experts, please subscribe to our channel and continue to receive updates.